Look, I thought, mimetic theory in film, well, we got to have some mimetic desire, right? And I think it's really, one problem we have is it's not at all controversial, or maybe not at all interesting, to argue that certain movies bristle with insights about the mimetic nature of human desire. I mean, this is kind of just trivial. Okay, so you can't just keep going on and about that. So both of the other speakers have been way more creative than that. But I thought we should really start, in order to justify the funds from Imitatio at least, with some really slam dunk down the middle examples, and I found one. And so this is not really the main subject of my talk, but I'm going to very quickly run through this one, just amazing example. And this I would call an example of direct communication or direct illustration of basic tenets of mimetic design. Okay? But then the real body of the talk is about something I think that is more subtle, which is indirect illustration or communication about aspects of mimetic desire or mimetic psychology. And the example I've chosen for that is a short 25-minute film. Robert, thanks for your forbearance, because he's seen that with me before once in Macau, and maybe I have rewritten some, but some of the material he's familiar with. But so that's the main part, which is this indirect thing. And the distinction direct, indirect, I don't think bears a lot of weight. It's probably a matter of degree or something like that. We can come back to that if people want to discuss it. So to move on, so that's the outline. We have direct versus indirect, pure versus hybrid twist films. That's a distinction I'll argue for. And in the case of this movie, which was based upon a short story by Bierce, an American writer, and the short story was called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And in the early 1960s, a French director with an Italian name, Robert Enrico, made a short film based upon this story, and he called it La Rivière du Hibou. And that's not really a literal translation, because une rivière is not a creek.
No.
Okay? Right. Paul, I will never disagree with Paul about French translation. You will lose. Don't even try it. So this is what I was saying before. And so for the direct one, it's the film called Big Sur, directed by somebody I don't know much about, Michael Polish, 2013. And this is a cinematic adaptation of a novel by Jack Kerouac, Qui était Québécois. And the character is Tijan. But that Tijan is really Kerouac. These are thinly veiled autobiographical texts, okay? So Josh, how should I do it? You have two really good friends. One is the Kerouac figure. The other one is the Neil Cassidy figure. Cassidy was the driver who was always on speed, and he was a fearless and mad individual. And the Kerouac figure admires him and copies him. Okay. That's well established. But I checked the novel, and the novel is not really a great example of the vérité romanesque defeating the romantic illusion. It's not that at all. Kerouac speaks about the spontaneous nature of his desire, right? And it just comes from within. So this scriptwriter and director, Michael Polish, took that Kerouac material and he did something creative with it. And parts of it, at least particularly the part I'm going to talk about here just for a bit, is really, revelation of mimetic desire. So how do I do this? Let me see. So these guys hang out in the car together, sharing a bottle of whiskey and smoking loads of cigarettes, talking nonsense. And Cassidy, the figure on the right, says, this girlfriend of mine is so hot, and he just goes on, really trying to stir up his friend's interest. And can you dig it, man? And then the guy says, yeah, I can dig it. He says, well, why don't I show her to you right now? We'll go to San Francisco where she lives and pay her a visit. He says, oh, cool, okay, let's go. So they head up there, and they're laughing like this and sharing really very kind of questionable masculine camaraderie. And so they come into her flat. And so this is the Cassidy figure who's involved with her already and comes in first. And she greets him warmly, as you can see, smiling, lovely. They embrace. And the Kerouac figure, Tijon, is standing there watching this. Oh, wow, she really is hot. Okay? And then they turn and hi. And he's kind of, huh? And so she says, well, you get a greeting too. And so then he's looking at his friend. Well, is this okay? I mean, it was, her eye is not meant to be bleeding. And it's interesting because he's the guy who's initiated this whole thing, and here he is starting, while shoving the two together, starting to perhaps wonder about the wisdom of this action, and oops, and this, holding hands still, but she's kind of letting go at that particular moment, all right? And then it gets more and more direct. And then, ooh. The plot thickens. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave that example here. There's actually even more. I mean, there is an aspect I should mention because it is connected to the other thing. There's the desire depicted in the characters, and it's true in the fiction that so-and-so desires so-and-so according to the desire of so-and-so. So there's that. There's also the question of spectatorial desire, our mimetic desire, because in what follows, I didn't really feel comfortable doing the frame grabs and showing you that. The two newly found lovers just go straight to bed, and it's quite erotic. And I think the rhetorical design of the film is meant to stir up our mimetic desire for the Kate Beckons. But I did some research on the actual historical figures, and that's part of the rhetoric. Is she's quite lovely, right, the actress, but you wouldn't say the same of the historical woman who was involved with these two, with Kerouac and Cassidy. She was anything but, like a fashion model or an actress. So our spectatorial desires, if possible, are being sort of titillated or stirred up by this business. So the import of direct illustration. So look, I insist on this point. Fictional events can provide no empirical confirmation of any strength whatsoever of the main tenets of the mimetic theory or of any other psychological theory, right? Why? Well, because there's impossibilia. Can be, the content of the fiction could be things that are psychologically impossible or totally unreal. So, but they can demonstrate conceivability and make a psychological doctrine more vivid, more detailed, and more plausible. And that's not nothing, far from it. I mean, when I say, can illustrate but cannot confirm, I'm not belittling the function or the cognitive value of the fiction work, because that just even raw conceivability can be absolutely crucial. Can we conceive of a machine that wants to be a human even though that's impossible? Stricto sensu, yeah. Right? And so that could be an important rhetorical function of a film that could have epistemic payoffs for us. But it's not going to prove it. It can prove that it's conceivable.
Yeah, that's
right. All right. So indirect illustration, my example. Now it's time to get myself off the hook for 25 minutes. And we're going to watch this really interesting film. I hope some of you have seen it, and I hope some of you have not seen it, because that is part of the issue. So I want to start out and talk about this idea of a twist film, and then get to the epistemic interest of films taking this rhetorical shape, and in particular application being, of course, the mimetic psychology. Okay, so now I have this distinction between twist films more generally and what I call a hybrid twist film. So standard, a pure twist, has two major components in terms of what Aristotle says in the Poetics. It's a peripeteia, which is a reversal, a major reversal, conjoined with a discovery and ignorasis, where it's not just the protagonist in the story who experiences this the simultaneous reversal and discovery, but also members of the audience. So that's the twist. And you thought it was going to be one way, then big discovery and reversal. No, that's not that. It's not the way it was at all. Now, small-scale twists are pervasive in narrative works. In some cases, the entire plot of the work is organized in function of a major twist that's crucial to understanding the work as a whole. And I want to argue that such twist films are philosophically significant in different sorts of ways. Now, let me mention, first of all, a couple of distinctions about cognitive access to cinematic works. It's one thing to have an immediate perceptual experience of the audiovisual display of the work, what you just had there. Something else to think about a work in the immediate absence of such a perceptual experience. Some cognitive psychologists use computer terminology to name this distinction. They contrast online and offline responses. I'm not a big fan of these kinds of computer analogies in psychology, but I think it's a good use of the term to refer to a subject's immediate perceptual, cognitive, and affective response to an audiovisual stimulus as online. That's the immediate response. And we often distinguish between the subject's first and subsequent online responses to a work. But second and subsequent online responses are normally influenced by comparisons and anticipations based upon memories of the prior online experience of that work, as well as by recollections and reflections that take place after the first online viewing. So in contrast to online responses or offline responses, which are judgments or reflections about a cinematic work that are not part of an occurrent perceptual experience of the audiovisual stimulus. We can distinguish between at least two different important kinds of offline experiences. One is memories, critical reflections and judgments referring to work that the subject has previously experienced online. These are recollective offline responses. The second kind of offline response is that of a subject who's never had an online experience of the work, but instead thinks about the work on the basis of testimony and other kinds of evidence. So those would be testimony-based offline responses or attitudes. What's commonly referred to as a spoiler is a matter of testimony received prior to a first online experience, where this testimony is sufficient, if remembered and believed, to make certain kinds of surprises impossible. Now, getting back to the twist film, we can say that these are works, the design of which occasions a marked difference between what the spectator is normally led to infer about the story during much of the first online experience of the work, and what the spectator ends up believing about the content of the story during subsequent online and offline experiences of the work. More simply put, the spectator is induced or led to believe one thing about the story during a first viewing, and then is led to recognize this belief as having been misleading. The spectator who watches the film a second time, like Robert today, right, does not normally acquire the same mistaken initial belief about the story events. Didn't get you a second time, did it, Robert? Nah. Boy, I said normally. Okay. That would only take place if the spectator somehow failed to remember what he or she learned during the first viewing, or was so damn dense that even after the first one, he didn't get the point. Twists are different from suspense then, since suspense generates and maintains uncertainty and related affect with regard to story questions. Oftentimes, even after you've seen the film, magically you can kind of get into the suspense mode. There's a whole literature on how that works, right? Whereas a twist promotes beliefs about the story in order to set the stage for the twist with its discovery of a veritas ex machina. That's the best line in the whole paper. I thought Sandy would like it. There are many straightforward examples of films that are designed to get every competent first-time viewer to experience a surprising twist with regard to one of the main dramatic questions raised by the story. The Sixth Sense with, what's his name? That's a really good example. Right? There are, however, hybrid works where one category of spectators is meant to be surprised by the twist, while another category of spectators is not meant to be taken in or surprised. And I want to argue that this film you just saw, La Rivière du Hibou, is such a hybrid work. Any spectator who's familiar with the Ambrose Bierce short story and who's aware that the film is an adaptation of this story should not be surprised when it turns out that the condemned man has hallucinated an elaborate escape in the instance before his death by hanging. Because if you read the story, you know that. Some spectators might also figure out, well before the end of the film, that the condemned man's escape has an unreal quality and is part of some sort of dream or vision or delaying tactic on the part of the cinematic storyteller. You can raise your hand if you want to place yourself in the category of the clever people. Good for you. All right. So I like that because I show this to loads of students and people in lots of different contexts, and it's always this hybrid mixed thing. A lot of people go, "Yeah, I was totally persuaded he was getting away," and others, can see, right? And when you see it a second time, that's what I'm going to argue here in a minute. You observe even more evidence. Okay, but nothing in the film initially communicates to the audience that this is an adaptation of the short story by Bierce. The title of the film, as I've already said, isn't a literal translation of the story's title, so it doesn't point decisively in that direction. For the target audience there was a version of this film, slightly shortened version of this film, was purchased by the American TV series Twilight Zone and broadcast in the United States. And most of those viewers would never have read the Ambrose Bierce story because it's a fairly obscure story. Okay, and so I think most of the target American audience would probably have been taken in by the twist. So my conjecture is that this is a film that was intentionally designed to function as a twist film for many, but not all, first-time viewers. Okay, we can talk about claims about authorship in film, but I better move on. So what is the epistemic or philosophical significance of twist films in general? You might initially think that this is a rhetorical device that does have some potential. It's not too hyperbolic to say that liberation from error is the great promise of philosophy. One philosopher after the next has advised his readers and interlocutors to become aware of the possibility that various opinions are erroneous. Pointing to the bases of our errors, the philosopher enjoins us to replace bad beliefs with good reasoning and genuine knowledge, perhaps even wisdom. Lucretius, for example, asks us to consider what it's like to watch other people struggling at sea or caught up in some gruesome battle. It's not that we enjoy the sight of such misfortune, he comments, but we do enjoy the thought that we are removed from the trouble suffered by the others we observe. Lucretius says it's similar with regard to beliefs, since if we accept the wisdom of his Epicurean system, we can enjoy the contrast between the security and correctness of our own beliefs and the horrible errors and uncertainty being suffered by these others whom we observe from a safe distance. But it's obviously not just Lucretius who made this sort of appeal for a better or more secure epistemic stance. Even the anti-dogmatic skeptical philosopher has a policy of belief revision to recommend, such as a general suspension of potentially erroneous commitments. So it's tempting to think of twist narratives as a kind of practical philosophical tutorial involving the inculcation of better belief policies through the realization and correction of cognitive error. In order to get a point across about the springs of folly, the tutor leads the student into a cognitive trap, then releases him in the hope that he'll draw a more general lesson about how to avoid such mistakes. Stay awake when you're watching movies. On the hypothesis that people can sometimes learn from their mistakes, this could be a well-motivated narrative strategy. Even if doxastic voluntarism is false, and that's just the view that you have some sort of direct, intentional control over what you believe. Like, believe right now that you're a millionaire. You can't do it. Right? So even if we don't have any kind of direct, voluntary control over our beliefs, we can indirectly influence our epistemic dispositions. We can look before we leap, and thereby improve the ways our beliefs are formed and revised. So that's one general sketch of how twist movies could have epistemic value or significance. The doubts can be raised about the idea that twists tend to promote any kind of real improvement of our belief policies. What is it, more specifically, that the spectator is supposed to learn from his or her experience of a narrative twist? If the cinematic experience presented to the spectators was cleverly designed to deceive them with regard to certain important elements of the story, when the twist comes along, they will have been taken in. At that point, the spectators can reflect that they had been reasoning correctly all along about the evidence that was given to them. It's just they were unlucky and got bad evidence. They happened to have been wrong about the way the story turned out to be, but at the time when the evidence was first presented to them, they drew precisely the inferences they were supposed to draw. Since they reasoned correctly about the evidence they were given, since there was no other evidence to which they ought to have had access, it would be wrong to say that they were guilty of any kind of epistemic irrationality or error. The spectator who's taken in by the twist has understood that part of the film competently, precisely in the way it was meant to be understood, and so cannot be blamed for making some kind of cognitive error. Now, if that's how twists in general work, the lesson they convey is that sometimes we can be tricked and in error through no fault of our own. Rational, evidence-based reasoning isn't sufficient to protect us from error, and if we do happen to escape from some error, it's only by luck or external circumstances. Just as Peyton Farquhar, the character in the film, has no control over the illusory vision he experiences before his death, the victim of a plot twist can only go where the narrative leads him or her. If this is right, then some kind of epistemic fatalism would be the implicit message of the twist, which is very bad news for both virtue epistemology and all internalist models of justification. And if that's the only message of twist films, then spectators would not be given any reason or motivation to try to avoid being deceived when another twist film comes along. I think, however, that this dire conclusion can be resisted. Whereas some twists are indeed designed to make epistemic puppets of the spectators, others aren't entirely like that. In this second kind of twist, when spectators look back at what happened, they have reason to believe that their reasoning about the evidence was somewhat faulty, and learning how this was so could be instructive for them. So let's consider the film you just saw with this distinction between rational and irrational kinds of twists in mind. This is not good terminology, but by rational twist, I just mean one that deceives even a perfectly rational, alert, smart spectator, right? So sort of a normative model of spectatorial competence. So a rational twist tricks those kinds of people, right? And then the other one, or no, did I have that? Yeah. And then the other kind of twist would be one where you have the hybrid situation where some smart viewers are not meant to be taken in, but other viewers who are not reasoning quite as well about the evidence would be taken in. So let's look at this example with this in mind. Early on in the film, the spectators are led to align themselves with the condemned man. And this is done in a very clever way. Point of view shots and subtle camera movements and other devices encourage this alignment with the man the soldiers coldly prepare to kill. And I have some frame grabs here to support these claims. So that's a, point of view subjective shot where you're really aligning with this guy who's standing on the plank looking down, he's got a rope around his neck, okay? And so then you have this kind of sequence where you have this medium close-up of the man looking, then we see what he sees, shot, reaction shot. And so he sees the soldiers there. Can I get away if I go over there? Nah. And then he looks the other way. Oops, he's blocking that exit route, Look this way. Oh, there's a guy up there, And all of this, by the way, that whole opening sequence establishes this kind of alignment that I'm trying to discuss here, what we're feeling for him and thinking in terms of what he's thinking about. But it also, we get a very good survey of the whole situation. No possible escape. Right? I mean, most of us, I think, just forget that or don't notice it or something goes wrong. But we've been given so much evidence about how he is really surrounded and trapped, and how in the world could he actually really get away. All right, then he has this vision. Do I write about this? Let's see. The montage device of shot, reaction shot promotes our cognitive alignment with the accused man. This is further strengthened when, having found no evidence of escape, he closes his eyes and goes into his own thoughts and imagines seeing his wife one last time. And the contents of this imaginative experience are presented directly to us as though we could share his inner vision. Okay. Now, there are other grounds for the targeted sympathy for the film, for the victim, and empathic projection into his emotional and attitudinal space. We're definitely in a post-sacrificial context here. The default setting is you're on the side of this guy who's about to be executed and not these soldiers who surround him. Whereas the narrator of Bierce's short story informs us that Farquhar is a wealthy slave owner who actively supports the Confederacy's cause, the film conveys no such information, but instead presents us with an apparently innocent civilian who's about to be executed. Since the bridge is visibly intact, this gentleman does not seem to be guilty of some major act of sabotage. Is the execution really justified? Is any form of capital punishment justifiable? Right? Spectators, in any case, meant to be sympathetic towards this man's desire to escape. Now, when the cinematic image prompts us to imagine seeing that the rope is broken, that the man has some hope of survival, spectators may be relieved or even thrilled. When he appears to have gotten away and rejoices, we share in his appreciation of the value of life, his simple joy at being a living man, who marvels at the light shining through the leaves and at the intricate web of a spider. We want to see this living man regain the embrace of his smiling wife. Yet when we learn that this has all just been a vision prior to death, and there is no real escape, the upshot is a striking vanitas meditation, a poignant reminder of the inevitability of death. One simple point that viewers may take away is that they ought to appreciate life more while they still have the chance, just as the man savors his existence most when its possible loss has become salient to him. Now, twist films vary with regard to the rewards or the interest of second and subsequent viewings in which the surprise is lacking. In most cases, the surprise occasioned by the twist is the film's single most important effect. If consumed a second time, the work is like sparkling wine that has gone flat. Yet this is not true of all twist films, and I want to argue that Enrico's work is a good example where the interest of the film is not exhausted by the twist. There's a very particular reason why that is so, a reason linked to the film's point. Spectators who see the film a second time with a twist in mind may be in a position to detect any number of previously unnoticed features of the cinematic presentation. For example, although the prisoner has been rather conveniently swept far downstream by the powerful rapids that suddenly turn up in a small creek, right? I should put in a parenthesis here, this film was actually shot in radically different locations in France. So the creek part with the bridge, and the initial plunge in the water was somewhere in Normandy, but the rapids is Les Gorges du Verdon, which is all the way in the south, and this is a very large, as you can see from the film, a very large river with very powerful rapids, right? So, and didn't you notice, how did that happen? Where did all that water suddenly come from? How did he get so far from the bridge where the water was hardly moving to powerful rapids? They're so powerful that the stunt person who was put down in the water for the shot virtually drowned. He went under a rock and was underwater for almost 3 minutes. Enrico was terrified that the guy was gone, and then he came out. It was a dreadful incident during the filming of the film. All right, so he's gone downstream, right, in these powerful rapids, but suddenly a shot from a cannon back on the bridge impossibly strikes close to where he's resting on the shore. Since when did those old-fashioned 1860 cannons shoot such long distances? Did you notice that? How in the world? So that's something you might have noticed. Perhaps some of you did, others didn't. You should have done. When Farquhar is running along the road, we hear loud, obtrusive drum rolls on a snare drum. The camera, which tracks along in front of him, seems to play a cat-and-mouse game with the runner. Camera's initially stable, he's in the distance. He runs towards the camera. He's getting there, he's getting there, he's getting there, he's getting there. No, he isn't. Camera backs up. He's never going to reach that camera. He falls down, and then the camera stops and waits for him. When he gets up and comes, then the camera moves back again. There's a kind of rhetorical, visual rhetoric of narrative instruction, teaching, a George Wilson phrase, teaching you, how to read this thing. Read it as unreliable narration. You're being tricked here, right? That's what you're being told by that very clever cinematography. So that gets repeated. Another unrealistic aspect of the film, which is mentioned by Enrico as having been planned in the early stages of the production, is that the wintry landscape at the beginning of the film stands in sharp contrast to the leafy springtime landscape in which the dream takes place. I don't know if you noticed that. There's completely different foliage and everything. The tranquil creek becomes a raging river, etc. Now, when Farquhar finally seems to reach his plantation, a majestic gate magically swings open to let him in. He doesn't touch the gate, it just moves open. Magic, okay? This does not square well with a realistic escape, but it's perfectly coherent with the entire escape being some kind of hallucination or dream. Spectators who notice such things only on a second viewing may wonder why they didn't notice and take proper account of them during the first viewing. Why didn't we see through the deception? To that question, there's both a simple and a more subtle answer. Simple answer is that in the absence of overwhelming evidence for the subjective or hallucinatory status of the events, the spectator's default or spontaneous assumption is that the represented events are what takes place in the story conveyed by the work. So the spectator is justified in going along with this on the first viewing, since, after all, improbable things do happen in many fictional stories. And we had no sure way to infer that this was not just one of those rather implausible stories. But on the second viewing, we notice things that make our prior acceptance of the unlikely escape a lot more questionable. It's not only that the escape is an improbable fantasy. The magical opening of the gate and other evidence only really makes sense when understood as parts of a representation of something like a vision or a hallucination. So the upshot is that on a second viewing, we may recognize a difference between the twist in this film, where we are somewhat irrational to let ourselves be deceived, and other twists where even the most alert and rational first-time spectator is tricked. And what is the error that we make if we are taken in by the twist in this film? Assuming that the target spectator is significantly aligned with the condemned man and with his desire to stay alive, it's likely that a mild version of motivated irrationality is at work in our response to the audiovisual evidence. We discount the evidence that there is no real escape and that death is inevitable. And if that is what we realize, the film can function as a vanitas reminder, not only about our mortality, but also about our tenacious, motivated inclination to overlook the facts. The conclusion doesn't have to be the pessimistic thought that we're doomed by our own irrationality to make cognitive errors, which might be true anyway, and that it's only a lucky twist of fate if one of our illusions gets corrected. Instead, the point could be that we should remain reflective and not let our wishful thinking and mimetic alignments lead us into error about our own mortality. So in conclusion, I've argued that some works with a twist, including La Rivière du Hibou, are best appreciated on a second viewing that reveals ways in which the twist was both prepared and subtly undermined. There are literary antecedents to this narrative strategy. Bierce's short story, by the way, is not one of them. This is a case where cinematic adaptation merits praise for some of the ways in which it diverges from and improves on the literary source. Bierce's narrator is an omniscient liar whose propositions imply reliable access both to Farquhar's mental states and to all sorts of relevant external facts, including facts unknown to Farquhar. It's only in the penultimate paragraph that this narrator, Bierce's narrator, gives the reader any reason at all to suspect that there's something strange or dubious about Farquhar's supposed escape. Simply put, the narrator tells us about the escape in order to trick us, abruptly taking back much of what he said. Rereading the story, one doesn't find any foreshadowing or clues, but bald deception on the part of the narrator, who tells the reader, for example, that, quote, Farquhar knew that the rope was broken and he had fallen into the stream. Farquhar knew it, says the omniscient narrator. If it is Farquhar's neck and not the rope that is actually about to be broken, how could he know that the rope had already broken? He couldn't. Yet this is exactly what the omniscient narrator asserts. Bierce's reader, then, is an epistemic puppet, and the rational first-time reader is to be tricked by the story twist. In case of the film, a fully rational and informed spectator is initially tricked but gathers contrary evidence and corresponding doubts along the way, well before the shots depicting Farquhar's demise. I'm almost done. A better antecedent for the alternative working of the twist in this film is Jane Austen's Emma. Rereading the text of this novel, we realize that the narrator dangled all kinds of evidence before our eyes, but that we let the narrator's free and direct discussions of Emma's vanity and conceit lead us to overlook this evidence. Similarly, in responding the first time to La Rivière du Hibou, the error many but not all spectators end up making is motivated and wishful. Spectators may subsequently be led to realize why they failed to draw a more lucid conclusion, and that's a worthwhile and moving philosophical lesson. Many of us, and I hasten to include myself here, are like Farquhar at the end, rushing forward, hopefully, here he is, never quite getting there, rushing forward, hopefully, never quite getting there, until the inevitable interruption. Voila, thank you for listening.